My lecture draws from arguments in my most recent book, Political Peoplehood. There I have joined with other scholars in arguing for a new direction for the organization of political communities around the globe, a direction that is very controversial in the United States and that may well be very controversial here in China, though it is also especially pertinent to the special circumstances of Hong Kong. It is because this argument is both controversial and pertinent that I am grateful for the opportunity to discuss it with you today. I've urged rejection of the view that the political world in the 21st century is best structured in the spirit of the famous Treaty of Westphalia, as a Westphalian system of sovereign nation states, each with ultimate absolute authority over its own members, and each with relatively closed boundaries to immigrants. I have argued instead in favor of seeking to create a world in which most people belong to a number of semi-sovereign political communities, multiple moderate forms of political peoplehood, to use my terminology, with none of these communities seeking to claim absolute authority over all aspects of the lives of their members, only partial authority over some aspects, and with all of these communities accepting that people can and should have multiple memberships, multiple allegiances, and that forms of political community should evolve and adapt over time as people's aspirations, needs, and interests change, and that each and all of these political communities should adopt policies and institutions that allow people to move relatively fluidly and flexibly between their different memberships. Relatively fluidly and flexibly does not mean open borders, but it does mean that most societies should be more open to people coming and going and staying when they come than they are now. Indeed, they should be as open as proves politically feasible. This view also means that they should be more open to permitting different regions, religions, cultural and ethnic communities within their boundaries to pursue relatively distinctive and autonomous ways of life, so long as these ways of life do not seriously burden the society as a whole. Practically, this means that political communities would become internally more diverse and also increasingly intertwined via alliances, treaties, membership in common multinational associations. Over time, these developments would and should lead to many new forms of formal federations among many types of political communities, moving in the direction of a global federation, though whether any such federation can be or should be ultimately achieved is, in my mind, an open question. As the political theorist Jean Cohen details in her valuable recent book, Globalization and Sovereignty, some scholars and advocates hope for the development of a global constitutional federation with a unified, inevitably hierarchical legal system. Others envision a more interlocked but still highly pluralistic world with some international judicial and representative institutions, preferably improved versions of those now associated with the United Nations, with such institutions enforcing treaties and a limited range of widely agreed upon human rights, but with a wide variety of communities maintaining distinctive, if interlinked and overlapping identities, and with most relations between these more interconnected and differing but cooperative and relatively open communities, most of those relations would be worked out through political means. I am closer to this second view, not a constitutional hierarchical federation, but a set of politically interconnected, overlapping communities. And I'm closer to it because I believe maintaining an array of particular and distinctive political communities is probably necessary if we are to have communities with the shared senses of valued identities that political societies need to endure and flourish. But it's not my purpose here to map out a whole new legal and institutional structure for the world of the 21st century, though I do find Cohen's view, which he terms constitutional pluralism, attractive. The focus of my work is on the politics through which morally compelling and practically effective senses of political community, of political peoplehood, can be created and sustained. For I think those senses of common identity are needed to make desirable formal structures of political institutions, governance, and law politically possible. And just to underline what's at stake in the argument I'm advancing, probably the most politically challenging and controversial part of the view I will defend is that even as this position seeks to encourage forms of political peoplehood that can inspire the loyalty and commitments needed for political societies to contribute to human well-being, under the kinds of political arrangements I am recommending, no political community would any longer present itself as a sole sovereign sharing power with no one. Instead, governments would only be able to claim partial authority, semi-sovereignty with the evolving scope of that semi-sovereignty worked out through political negotiations with their members and with other regimes. Building on the work of the developmental economist Lant Pritchett, I've also argued that wealthier countries like the US, Northern Europe, and Japan could benefit themselves and the world, growing their national economies and reducing global poverty by accepting that political openness to multiple memberships includes increasing their receptivity to less skilled immigrants from poorer countries. These immigrant workers would take productive but low-paying jobs that would make them significantly better off than they would be if they stayed at home, and there is good reason to think their labor would grow their new nation's economies without significantly harming even less skilled native workers. Now, that argument is less applicable at present to China, so I will not pursue it in this lecture, but I'll be happy to discuss it after if it's of interest. Acceptance of the view I'm advancing as either normatively right or even politically credible is very hard anywhere. As Donald Trump is currently reminding us, such acceptance is particularly difficult in the United States. We Americans built our nation on beliefs that we are a city on a hill, a model and guide for the world, exceptional, providentially favored. Those beliefs have been around since our colonial era. They were strengthened by the political challenges of winning support for the American Revolution. And then they were enormously reinforced by the realities that America has now become the world's largest economy and military superpower with bases all around the world. Though in the 21st century, the Chinese economy threatens to overtake the U.S. in size, and the U.S. also, on many measures, no longer has the highest standard of living, nor does it have nearly enough military power or soft power to be able simply to work its will throughout a complicated multipolar world. So the U.S. needs to adapt in the 21st century, I think, in the direction of the post-Westphalian world I am describing. And America's willingness to adapt will play a significant role in whether other countries can also adapt. In my recent work, I've been asking whether the United States can come to see itself not as a city on a hill, but as a great metropolis on a plain, with other great cities there as well. And my belief is that if the United States can do so, other communities may be able to do so as well. But let me acknowledge again that advocacy for the kinds of flexible, semi-sovereign forms of peoplehood I am defending may be just as unwelcome, or more so, here in China than it is in the United States. Imperial China, of course, long saw itself as having a mandate from heaven that made it the center of human civilization, a very credible claim for a long time. And today's China is wary of any erosion of the central authority it sees as necessary for the successful governance of such a huge civic population residing over vast and diverse territories. I recognize there are good reasons for resistance in China and the U.S., as well as elsewhere, to any substantial movement away from the claims of absolute sovereignty in relatively closed political communities that present themselves as distinctive and exceptionally valuable, the kinds of positions I'm arguing against. Societies like China and the United States, who have a strong sense of their special, even superior identity, are often unusually able to inspire the support for common institutions and the willingness to make sacrifices for one's community that are needed for human beings and human societies to flourish over time. One big message of my work on political peoplehood is that it is much, much easier to sustain political communities if people believe those communities are truly special. A movement toward a world of interlocked communities with fluid and flexible memberships threatens to lose that sense of belonging to distinctive, special communities. What is more, there is an extremely valuable orderliness to a world of sovereign nation-states with clear lines of accountability and responsibility that may be lost, replaced by unruly disorder, if we move in the directions I suggest. But as numerous analysts of globalization have shown, there are already many trends moving the world in the direction I describe, including heightened global economic, communications, and transportation networks, as well as immigration flows that are already making many more societies more open and diverse than in their past. And these developments are already being accompanied by increased acceptance of formal legal dual or multiple citizenships. These economic, political, technological, and cultural trends are all linked to political movements both to create supranational forms of political community, like the European Union, the African Union, the Union of South American Republics, and along with this movement toward supranational forms of community, there are movements toward greater devolution in existing regimes, with Scotland, for example, seeking greater autonomy, or not, if not independence, in the United Kingdom, and Catalonia similarly seeking autonomy, if not independence, in Spain. Both supranational federations and devolution create the kinds of interlocked multiple memberships and communities that I'm describing and advocating. These developments also mean that there is more broadly a heightened sense on the part of many people, even I imagine in China, that they already inhabit multiple communities, physically or virtually, that are all deeply meaningful to them. Many people want to pursue lives in multiple communities without having them hierarchically ordered under one absolute sovereign. All these trends are undeniably moving us in the direction I describe. But that movement is far from inevitable, since there is lots of understandable resistance to it.